asked to speak with you tonight, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me and to thank Karen for opening up your dinner to have a talk. And I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for Texas overall for its work on voter accessibility issues. The League is a wonderful partner of MALDEF and a great friend of ours in the legislature, and you do fantastic work on civic participation. And so I want to have this opportunity and thank you very much for the work that you do. We can count on you to stand with us to support fair policies on voter registration and participation, even when there is a strong push against it. Wow, nobody ever told me to talk louder. I'd also like to give a shout out tonight to our legislative staff attorney, Luis Figueroa, who is with MALDEF, and you see him in the lab. Stand up, Luis, say hello. Like many of you, Luis does the hard work in the legislature, running from committee room to committee room and doing the testimony. Sometimes grueling testimony. Anita was remembering, Luis, before you got here, your 3-hour testimony while you were being grilled on redistricting in the House Committee this past session. And it reportedly was cool as a cucumber during the whole time, although he wasn't cool about it when he told me later. Since I had sent him in to do that, I was like, don't worry about it, Luis, just go in and talk about that. I was going to talk about redistricting first, but not in a really technical, complicated way, because then you'll all be asleep before I get to voter ID. But, you know, when you talk about redistricting, you really have to start with demographics and changes and population growth. When the census numbers came out in December of 2010, and we learned how many people there were in the country and how many people there were in each state, and we learned how the 435 seats in the House of Representatives were going to be apportioned across the state. I was actually not in Texas at the time, but I was jumping up and down in the street because we found out we had gotten 4 new seats in the House of Representatives. Texas was the big, big winner. We totally got the jackpot on apportionment after the 2010 census. And that was because Texas grew like gangbusters. Unlike some of the other states in the north and in the Rust Belt that were facing losing seats and making very painful decisions about having to pair members of Congress. For example, New York State lost 2 seats, didn't they? 2. And there were other states that lost either 1 or 2 seats. We got 4, which was more than anybody else got. The other states that won big only got as many as 2. So it was very, very exciting. We also knew fairly soon after that that Latino growth had been a big part of the engine that was fueling Texas's growth. So these are probably the only numbers I'm going to give you, but they're very impressive. In Texas, over the last decade, the Anglo population grew by 464,000, so just under 500,000. African Americans, 523,000, so just over 500,000. Asians and others, 516,000, so just over 500,000. Latinos, 2.8 million in 1 decade. And that proportion of growth was the same in the last decade, from 1990 to 2000. So when you get this kind of really dramatic growth within the state, there's also going to be a reaction from people in power. And I don't mean to talk about that like a political party or anything like that, but power is power. And the people in power watching these numbers grow and trying to figure out how to work around it. Sometimes work with it if luck is going your way, but more often, frankly, it's work around it. And so that's my introduction to redistricting. We started off the 2011 legislative session without numbers. And I think we may even have had at least 1 hearing. I know we had field hearings with no numbers, which is really interesting. So everybody's like, well, if it looks like this, we should draw like that. We should try to be fair, but nobody had any numbers. And then we got numbers in February in the legislative session, and then we went forward with more hearings and then finally some maps. Again, the League of Women Voters of Texas calling for a transparent process, calling for fairness in the maps was a huge help to us and to all the communities that went forward looking for some kind of fairness, some kind of openness in the process. And you have to ask for the process to be fair and open even when it isn't. I have to say I'm very proud of the fact that Latino organizations in this round came together early. In fact, it was the week that the numbers came out, but it was before the numbers came out, that we had our first formal meeting of a coalition of statewide Latino organizations that were committing to work in coordination for fairness and for openness and for decent maps. And I want to recognize now Lydia Camarillo, who's the Vice President of Southwest Voter Registration Education Project. Lydia was the co-chair of the statewide task force of Latino organizations, which you can imagine if you've ever chaired anything, definitely herding cats. Through the whole session and then afterwards, Lydia performed unrecognized and invaluable work, keeping everybody on the same page in terms of what we were going to be asking for districts, what our maps were going to look like. Unfortunately, the process was not open. We did not see a map for the congressional plan during the regular legislative session. Now, you better nod, please, because if I get this wrong, just circle it like this. We didn't see a map for the congressional plan. We had lots of hearings, but no map. So we were coming forward with our maps, but the legislature's maps were being drawn behind closed doors. Lots of negotiating was going on, lots of emails were flying back and forth, which we saw later in the litigation. But at the time, we just sort of met a lot of blank faces and a lot of, well, we're open to what your ideas are. So we were coming forward with our maps, and we weren't seeing anything coming from the ledge. The maps did roll out for Congress in the special session, which was in the summer. Once the congressional map was out, we had 1 day's notice to testify on it in the hearing. And so it was really requiring us to be sort of at our top level of sophistication to be able to analyze a congressional redistricting plan in an evening and then prepare some kind of talking point so we could go roaring in the next day and say, how could you not have created even one new Latino majority congressional district? Which we did. Because we figured that out. As soon as we saw the map, we were like, oh, there's no new Latino districts in it. There was a similarly rushed process with the State House plan where lots of people were asking for changes on the State House plan, and those changes were not made. Sometimes committee hearings were called from the floor that a hearing would happen later the same day. So unless you were on the floor or in the gallery, you wouldn't even know that a meeting was going to happen. And so it was pushed through in the same way. The League of Texas and National called on Texas to reject the maps that came out. But it was once these maps were released, they just moved right through. And part of the gentleman's agreement in the Texas legislature is that once there was a State House map, the Senate passed it without making changes. And similarly, once there was a Senate map, the House passed it without making any changes. So once it moved through that particular body, there was no way to stop it. We did conclude that the plans were discriminatory on the basis of race. I mentioned to you already that the congressional plan had no new Latino majority seats, even though there were a couple of places in the state where it was just so obvious. It was so obvious. Karen was mentioning earlier, when you have a district that's overpopulated, you have to move that population out, sort of theoretically. Nobody moves. I actually gave a speech once where somebody came up afterwards and asked if they were going to have to move. Really careful. So, you have a district that's overpopulated, you're going to have to draw the lines differently so that the district goes back to the normal, the number that is, that every district has to have, right? And so what we saw in the south part of Texas, you can picture in your mind a big map of Texas. I usually do this with a PowerPoint. We're going to use our imaginations because we are very smart. So from El Paso all the way down, right? Congressional 16, Sylvester Reyes. Big West Texas, Congressional 23, which is now represented by Canseco. In San Antonio, you have the District 20, that is Charlie Gonzalez, represented by him. 28, which runs from Laredo up to San Antonio, which is Henry Cuellar. 27 on the Gulf Coast, which was represented by Solomon Ortiz for many years and is now represented by Blake Farenthold of the Ducky Pajamas. And then District 15, which runs up Ruben Hinojosa out of McAllen. All of those districts were overpopulated. And when you added up all of that extra population that needed to go in another district, it was 3/4 of a new district. All you had to do was go and get the last quarter of the population to complete a 7th Latino majority district in South Texas. Similarly, up in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, huge growth. Any Metroplex people here? Oh, look at this. Huge growth. You've seen enormous growth in the Metroplex. If you took all the districts that were currently existing in the Metroplex and added up all the excess population there, you got, I think it was only 20,000 people short of a new congressional district, so almost 700,000 people in the Metroplex. And again, the question was, how would that district be drawn. These places were crying out for additional representation, and from my perspective, additional Latino representation. And yet there was no net gain. There was a little bit of switching around, a little bit of renumbering, but there was no net gain in the congressional plan that came out of the legislature. And honestly, after having beat them in 2006 on redistricting, I thought they had learned their lesson, that we would see a more fair plan, but no. You know, I described it like a mental disease. You tell them, don't touch some of this stuff, and they just, they had to reach out and do it again, which is what they did. On the state house, it was worse. We actually lost 2 Latino opportunity seats in the House, and that was some very artful line drawing. When you take a state that has grown by 2.8 million Latinos and reduce the number of Latino opportunity seats by 2, it was, in fact, admirable in its own. You know, if you draw lines for a living, you're like, wow, that was artful and insidious. So we went into litigation. I mean, the statewide Latino task force realized after all these efforts that we had done in the legislature that we were going to have to go to litigation, which we did, and we sued Texas. And it turned into 3-ring circuits, literally. We had lawsuits pending against Texas here in Texas, pending here in San Antonio. Texas itself sued for a declaration that its plans complied with portions of the Voting Rights Act, and that lawsuit was in Washington, D.C. So we tried one case in Texas, we tried another case in D.C., and in the middle we had an appeal to the United States Supreme Court. So we had 3 things running all at the same time, and nobody got any sleep, and everybody enjoyed the Sunday off for the holidays. And looming over all of the legal proceedings was this urgent need to find out when we were going to hold our primaries, because we have to have elections. Despite all this arguing and the line drawing, we have to have elections. And you have to have enough time before the election to get everything straightened out, to get the lines drawn, get the precincts divided, get the voter registration cards cut with the new precinct numbers on them. Find out, provide a filing period for candidates. You know, they want to know where they're going to run. Draw their names, find out the ballot order, print the ballots, which is often done through vendors in a lot of counties, so you have to give them time too. So all this had to be backed up. So there's a lot of pressure on all of the judges to make very quick evaluations of the claims. The cases are not over yet, actually, except for the Supreme Court case, which went up and came back down. But we do have interim redistricting plans for the 2012 cycle only. We still don't know what it's going to look like in 2014 or afterwards. That will depend in part on some of the rulings that we're still waiting for. But we do have plans for 2012, and those are based on the judge's evaluation of what is likely to be a good illegal claim. And I'm very proud to say that the court found that it was likely and that we have good legal claims to create a new Latino majority district in South Central Texas, which they did put in the plan, and a Latino majority district in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So we did get those 2 districts for congressional for the 2012 elections. On the State House, we got the restoration of some of the districts. We didn't get every district we wanted, but we think we can live with the plan for now, and that will be an increase of 1 Latino majority district over the benchmark level for the State House. And also a district that shifted from kind of the Beeville area, if you know South Texas at all. One of the district that was in that area shifted down into the Rio Grande Valley where there was more population growth. And I just wanted to say there was tremendous support for an additional House district in the Rio Grande Valley. It spans Cameron County and Hidalgo County, so it's kind of from a little bit of Brownsville, a little bit of kind of the stuff in between, if you know the lower. Anybody from the valley here? Okay. Thank you for being from the valley. Down there, lots of colonias, lots of infrastructure issues, lots of need from everything from a VA hospital, which we still don't have in the valley, and people have to drive all the way to San Antonio to get here. We have so many veterans living there. We've got people living without potable water, people living without street paving. I have now seen unpaved streets. That, you know, it's not just a paper game. You know, it's not just drawing lines on a map. It's about getting one more voice in the State House who will stand up for the needs of Hidalgo County and Cameron County. And so in the end, you know, what gets me up isn't necessarily the technical thrill of drawing maps, but I am thrilled by the maps. It's about making sure that the people that we know and that our organizations represent in the coalition are getting real representation. So they will have an opportunity to elect one more member of the State House as a result of the redistricting. I did want to add a note on partisanship, because sometimes people think that trying to draw additional Latino districts lines up some way or another with partisanship, and it honestly really doesn't. We spend about half our time litigating against Democrats and the other half litigating against Republicans. Because as I mentioned earlier, power is power, you know, and an incumbent can feel threatened by Latino growth regardless of the political party. Sometimes the incumbent thinks that Latinos in the district won't vote for him in the general election. And so he doesn't want Latinos in his district because he doesn't want to be affected in the general election. But sometimes the incumbent thinks Latinos won't vote for him in the primary. And so that's a situation where you may have a Democratic incumbent who doesn't want more Latinos necessarily in the district because maybe a Latino will challenge him in the primary and he's been there a long time. And so it's kind of like navigating rapids. You're never sure when you want to encompass Latinos in a district, whether it's a state house district or a congressional district, which incumbent will get mad or why, or for what reason, whether it's related to the general or to the primary. But we stand fast to our goal to give Latinos a voice in choosing the person who's going to represent them. It's that simple. Latinos can elect somebody who's purple with green spots and belongs to the, I don't know, the party of using, better nail polish. It doesn't really matter what the party is. It doesn't matter what the race is. It's about being able to choose the person that we want to see in office, the person who will represent our interests, not to have that person chosen for us by anybody else, either through line drawing or otherwise, polarized voting. It's just about being able to send somebody that we want to send to, the State House or to Congress. So that was just my little spiel about partisanship. And I'm glad to speak to a nonpartisan organization about that, because if you were anybody else, you might have been throwing fruit at me. And finally, voter ID. In 2006, actually not in 2006, but in 2005, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which is widely known as being the most effective piece of civil rights legislation ever passed. And it's been tremendous. It has opened the doors to so many people registering and voting. But around the same time as the 40th anniversary, we started to see bills cropping up in state legislatures all around the country around voter integrity, right, and stopping voter fraud. And we started to hear this drumbeat. And Luis, who does our legislative work, started tracking these bills all over the Midwest and the Southwest, and they were being drafted by ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is the conservative think tank. And these clone bills were being introduced all over the place, and we were starting to fight them. We in fact made a packet to send out to other advocates in other states about voter ID, particularly photo voter ID. The effort in Texas was in 2005. The first one was 2005, 2007, 2009, and collectively we were able to defeat these bills, but then it was finally passed in 2011. And right now has not been implemented yet, but Texas has brought a lawsuit to seek preclearance under the Voting Rights Act so that it can be. The League is an intervener in that lawsuit, and your participation is essential. And also MALDEF, my organization, represents a number of organizations that have intervened as well, including Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, which does a lot of get out the vote and voter registration work that's really key. This nationwide effort is concerted, and it's very serious. It is, I believe, a response to the trend of increased voter access that we see through the hard work of passing things like the federal motor voter bill, where it's easier to register now. When I turned 18, I had to go down to the county seat during working hours and register in person. Now you can register the postcard by mail, the federal postcard. You can register at the motor voter. You can register at public assistance if your state is complying with the National Voter Registration Act, which sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Expansion of voter access through early voting. All of these things are wonderful advancements, and I believe that photo ID requirements are a direct response to stopping the flow of new voters that we have entering the electorate. So to some degree, I think the resistance is just voting by anybody. Although I have to read you this quote from a conservative columnist, Matthew Vadum, on registering the poor in particular. He said, "Registering them to vote is like handing out burglary tools to criminals. It is profoundly antisocial and un-American to empower the non-productive segments of the population to destroy the country. I don't know, some of you may have seen that quote. But he was basically saying you shouldn't register the poor. They don't contribute, and they're just going to vote for programs that shift money from the people who have it to the people who don't. And so you can see the connection here in these photo ID and other kinds of barriers that are being erected to voting between wanting fewer poor people to vote and requiring paperwork that you have to buy or purchase, like a driver's license, as a condition of voting. But I also firmly believe that these restrictions are coming in response to demographic change as well, and that at least some of this is about race. And I'll give you two quotes from my favorite former legislator, Betty Brown. I love Betty Brown. Everybody knows about her Asian remarks, so I'll start with that one. Betty Brown is very good at expressing anxiety about people of color voting. So this was in 2009, Texas House Elections Committee hearing on voter ID. She's talking to an advocate who is Chinese American, who's talking about some issues that come up for Asian American voters with voter ID. Is that sometimes people have their formal, let's say you're a Chinese voter, formal Chinese name transliterated, so it sounds like your Chinese name, and this could be on your very important documents, like your official documents. But then you might also have sort of an Americanized name that might be on your voter registration certificate. So you might have a more complicated name, but you might choose to call yourself Kathy. And so half your stuff's Kathy, and the other half of your stuff sounds Chinese. So he's explaining this to Betty Brown, who responds, rather than having everyone here learn Chinese, I understand it's a rather difficult language, do you think that it would behoove you and your citizens to adopt a name that we could deal with more readily here? And to his credit, the witness just kind of continued on, but it made national news that she was telling Asian American voters to change their names so that they could be more readily processed by the people at the polls. A lot of people know about that quote. Not so many know about what she said in 2005, which I think is even more illuminating about her anxieties. She introduced a bill related to voter registration, and a lot of times these go together, but her bill had to do with voter registration and having to produce additional paperwork to prove that you were a United States citizen in order to register to vote. Because we all know that there's hordes of people crossing the border without papers and going straight to the county registration office. You know, they don't stop to work anywhere. They just go straight to the county registration office so they can get on the rolls and thwart the integrity of the election system. So here comes Betty Brown. She's talking, she's rolling out her bill on proof of citizenship, and she's already been questioned by Rafael Anchia, who's from Dallas County, which is right next to the county that she represented, which was Kaufman County, because she was from Houston, Texas. So supposedly she knows him. I mean, he's right next door to her. And he's been asking her, you know, there's been a big increase in population in our area, and she acknowledges big increase in population, and of course the unspoken is that a lot of Latino population as well. So she ends up talking about why it's so important to have proof of citizenship requirements on voter registration. She says, Representative Anchia, I hope I said that right, yes, I know, even I cringed. She says, has brought up some things about population trends, and I think that just reinforces the need for it to happen now and not later, because our population is growing very rapidly, and we need to put these safeguards into place while this is happening. So she's making a direct reference to the increase in Latino population and saying, we've got to put some limits here, and some requirements for additional paperwork, which many people can't meet, or just won't. You know, if you're in a community-based registration fair, let's say you're at some local fiesta, or you're just out there living your life and you're not registered, and somebody comes up with a clipboard and says, would you like to register to vote? You say, sure, I'm not registered, I'd love to register to vote. And then the person with the clipboard says, by the way, I need to have a copy of your birth certificate so I can attach it. You're not carrying your birth certificate. And who's going to give their birth certificate to be photocopied? That kind of requirement, or, you know, let me have your naturalization certificate. Or how many people here right now are carrying a U.S. passport in their, you know, on their person? You see? A couple of people, maybe 2 people. So in this festival, in which you're all coming around buying your phone cakes and doing this, how many of you are carrying proof of citizenship? Not so many. And that was really, a lot of these laws grandfather the people who are already registered to vote, but it's those who are newly entering the electorate that are met with these requirements. So anyway, Texas voter ID. One thing that I think is really important important when we're talking about voter ID is to point out that Texas already has a voter ID law. We require people, when they go to vote in person at the polls, to show something. Some people show their driver's license. Some people show their voter registration certificate, which comes to you in the mail and is free. And so why is it that Texas feels this huge compulsion to take away a form of voter ID? This isn't about imposing voter ID. This is about taking away the ability to use what so many people already use now that doesn't cost any money and doesn't require you to travel anywhere. It comes to you and it's free. So I just get very upset when people talk about how Texas adopted voter ID and suggest that perhaps before everybody, people were just running in willy-nilly misrepresenting who they were. We've had this voter ID for a long time. So the Texas law does allow for a free ID, but you have to travel to the motor vehicles department during a time that the motor vehicles department is open, and you have to bring some kind of original documentation that will be good enough for you to get a driver's license in order for you to get your free voter ID. And again, anybody who's done get out the vote work knows that sometimes the difference between somebody voting and somebody not voting is, what's on TV, quite frankly. Or how do I get dinner on the table and get my kids home from school and do all that before 7 o'clock when the polls close? So adding these additional hurdles of, and you've got to bring this, and if you don't have it, you have to take a day off from work. I just think it's really going to suppress, even by people who could potentially get the ID, it's going to suppress turnout. What you can't show as ID under the Texas law is a birth certificate. You cannot show that. A student ID, photo ID, no. You cannot, even if you go to a state school like UT, no, you cannot show that. A utility bill, no. Insurance, car insurance that you might have in your glove compartment, no. Official correspondence from from anybody, from a government body, a social security letter or something like that, no. Obviously not your voter registration certificate. Can't show court documents. You can't show private and state employment IDs. And this doesn't even get to this question of the people whose names may not match across their various forms of ID. I represented somebody in Arizona. She was a married woman. All her documentation was under her maiden name. She had gotten married. She was at one of these community festivals. She's walking with her husband. She's so in love. And somebody asks her if she wants to register to vote. She's so thrilled. And she does. She's like, I love you. She puts her first name and his last name on her voter registration. She puts her husband's name on her voter registration. She goes to vote, and she doesn't have any ID in her name as her married name, basically, is what she had. And the same thing happens with people who anglicize their name in the Latino community. You could be Ernesto on most of your paperwork, and you registered as Ernest because you've been called Ernest since the first grade in the school, and now suddenly the importance of being Ernest is hanging on it. And then, of course, we see a lot of this folded into the anti-immigrant stuff. You hear a lot of talk about voter integrity tied up with talk about undocumented immigration. Somehow the voter fraud and the undocumented immigration all gets rolled up together. And that's a way for them to kind of take the debate away from some of these issues around poverty, around access, because then suddenly it just turns into immigration. So that's my particular lens on these issues. In conclusion, I would say that, really, we have to promote the idea that the best approach to demographic change is to promote participation and not to limit it. For incumbents who, are afraid to seek people's votes, get out there and ask people for their vote. Don't try to draw them away or draw them into districts where they're going to be ineffective or stop them from going to the polls altogether. The changes are going to happen, and we have to embrace them, and we have to be open to simply asking people for their support and not to assume that, these new people won't vote for me, so I just need to suppress it. I wanted to tell you that we look forward to collaborating with the League of Texas and the National League. The battles continue, and we applaud your work, and we admire your work, and we look forward to working with you in the future.